take them and let the weight of the limb set back over the blind and let the bushy part hang out. I can't tell you how many times we've come back after a week or so and there'd be a scrape under the limb that we got hanging out, And a couple of times we've been in the blind and a buck just comes up and starts licking branch, raking his eyes and doing a scrape and raking his horn, his antlers. I get in trouble for calling them horns. Hi, I'm Spook Spann.
And I'm Brian Stevens.
Welcome to the 11th Commandment,
a podcast about how chasing big whitetails has become a religion to us. The plan is to get into the head of one of the most successful whitetail hunters on the planet
and to share over 40 plus years of hunting experience with you. Big bucks, life, and America. Here we go.
Welcome to the 11th Commandment, brought to you by Spook Nation. I'm Brian Stevens with Mr. Spook Spann. It's a beautiful day down here in Florida. Talk to me about Tennessee. How hot is it there, my man?
Hot and humid already. I'm already disliking summer, and we ain't even out of June yet.
We aren't even out of June. We just got back. You and I were talking a minute about Dagger Dive with Task Force Dagger Special Operations Foundation. We had an awesome event down there in Key West. But I'm going to tell you, the last few days, buddy, it was some kind of brutal hot. But a great event. And,
I don't know why, though. For some reason, the heat don't seem as bad when you're at the beach.
It doesn't. And when you're on the boat,
it don't seem as bad.
You're right.
We're getting ready to go for a few days, and I'm looking forward to getting away for a few days.
Absolutely. And then it'll be back to, food plots. And believe it or not, it'll be mid-July and August, and we'll be hot and heavy and talking about preseason and all that stuff.
I actually spent the last few days bush hogging. So we've had a record-setting amount of rain in June here in Tennessee and a lot of places. So just in the last week, I've drove to Kansas and set up on a new buck that we know about. We're going to see if we can get him on camera and make a plan for. And then I put out buck muffins here at home today, bush hog clover for the last 3 days, just kind of getting everything. This will probably be the last time I'll have to bush hog it for probably the whole summer, because now we're fixing to turn off hot and dry, and so everything looks amazing. Seeing a lot of deer, seeing a lot of fawns this past week, seeing a lot of baby turkeys just in the last week. I saw a hen this morning, had 11 little ones.
Love it.
So yeah, it's a fun time. I love seeing the fawns and the baby turkeys, and so yeah, it's all good.
That's good. Well, today we're going to get into another Q&A, my friend, and we've gotten some really good feedback, and we're going to swap in between the deer stories and these Q&As. And I think, as we get closer to deer season and talking about some of these topics that, there's some interest in and picking your brain on them. So let's just jump into it. And one of the questions is really about blind and the camo setup and or how to set up the blind. And this is one of your, expertises, if you will, related to going to that extra level. So here's the question. When sitting in a ground blind, does camo pattern matter? I feel like black is the best option. So this is going to be inside the blind, but we're going to talk about the outside of the blind setup too.
Yeah.
So I feel like black is the best option. They're talking about Sitka pattern seems to stick out. What are your thoughts?
So to me, a lot of this is where the importance of the camo outside of the blind comes in.
Got it.
So remember, everything outside of the blind is brown and green and grays and all these different mixtures of woody type
foliage and trees and all that. Yep.
Foliage and all that. And so when you camo a blind the way I think it should be camoed up, and you do the overhang that gives the 3D perception where it doesn't look like a black square or rectangle or round hole, and you have that 3D look, I don't think it makes any difference what you wear. You know,
Okay.
now I do wear, when I can, I wear black, but most of the time I just wear my trees and camo.
Okay.
Because I feel like that I've done such a good job camoing the blind and creating it's so dark in there when I don't think that the deer sees anything anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've never had any problem. Yes, when when I can, especially if it's not very hot, I'll wear black. But when it gets cold, none of my heavy stuff is black, so I just wear my trees and camo. But uh, I think the most important part is camoing up the blind properly, making sure it's sealed up good. You got your ground cleaned off good, raked out, right down on the dirt. Most ground blinds have a little flap that folds in
Mm-hmm.
or out. I like to fold it in and rake dirt up on it, and so there's no air getting out. That way, when I'm running the ozonics inside, I'm getting the full effect. I'm not losing any of the ozonics out anywhere except, just getting full utilization of it covering our scent. And, uh, but there's a lot to making sure the blind looks natural. And I tell you, the first time I ever really, really noticed this, a friend of mine that's probably the best waterfowl hunter that I know, Doug Miner, and Doug works for Strike Kings, been in the outdoor industry his whole life. He's great fisherman, incredible waterfowl hunter, great duck caller. He moved to Idaho. I missed getting to see him, but he used to, when we used to camo up our duck blinds, we used to use oak uh, limbs with the leaves on it, and the oak would hold its leaves
Mm-hmm.
throughout the winter, even though it was cut off the tree. But every blind just looked like a dark brown, or if you were up in an airplane, it looked like a black box. It didn't look natural at all.
Okay.
And I'll never forget us. We was on a public hunting area, and Doug had drew a blind not too far from us, and we were just in the boat looking around, and he had camoed up a blind. And literally, if you didn't know that the blind was supposed to be there, you wouldn't have known it was there.
Okay.
He used a
What did you
mixture.
do?
So he used a mixture rather than using all of one species of tree or limbs to camo it up. He used 3 or 4 species.
Okay.
And one thing that gets overlooked a lot now, everybody doesn't have access to beech, but we have a lot of beech here, a lot of beech trees in different places, and cedars. And
Mm-hmm.
so I like to take oak and maple and hickory limbs and mix them all up. Cedars are awesome in most places around the country have cedar, and you can mix in some cedar. Not only is it the smell awesome and helps, it's also it's
Mm-hmm.
green and
Yeah.
it's okay. It works in this setting. And then you mix those beech limbs, which beech limbs have a real, almost orangey, beigey, tan color to them, according to what time of the year they are when they turn colors. And they just give it such an amazing 3D effect. And occasionally, I mean, a lot of times during the course of the season, if you're hunting out of this blind, you may have to add some brush to it and
Mm-hmm.
do some more things to it.
Yeah.
It's not always just a one and done kind of thing, but most of the time, if you do a good job brushing it in the beginning, they get used to it really quick. So whatever happens, transformation slowly is not a
Yep.
break to them. You just want to make sure your head good. Another thing I like to do, I like to cut me a big, like oak, and I say big, I mean just 3 inches in diameter or something, 2 or 3 inches in diameter. It's got nice limbs on it. That's got, and I like to trim it up to the level of the height of the blind and put it right up against the blind, and then let the limbs that are, hanging out in front of it. That's part of what gives you 3D effect. Sometimes I'll take rope if I've got a couple of trees around me or little trees or something. I'll take rope and tie like the top of the blind, and then I'll run rope around those trees, and then just lay that brush on top of that rope and let it hang out. And I mean, we've literally had, and also a lot of times I like to cut. I find me some limbs that have long stems to them, but maybe just just a little bushy part on the end.
Yep.
And I'll take them and let the weight of the limb set back over the blind and let the bushy part hang out. I can't tell you how many times we've come back after a week or so and there'd be a scrape under the limb that we got hanging out, you know. And a couple of times we've been in the blind and a buck just comes up and starts licking branch, raking his eyes, and doing a scrape and raking his horn, his antlers. I get in trouble for calling them horns. That's so funny how people go crazy.
If that's what we're getting upset about, then folks, we got some problems.
Right? Well, some of the old rednecks used to do that around here.
We've all done it, brother. I mean, come on.
About them, and I just get tickled. But we've gotten some crazy footage through the years with them coming up.
Yeah.
And be literally this far. And I always thought that was like one of my dreams, is always to kill a really big one at like 3 feet with an arrow, you know, where he comes up and doing a licking branch on your camo. But we've had that happen.
That's awesome.
Several times. But yeah, so and when you do all that, then I do like to set back in the blind as far as possible. But it's something that the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And another thing, when you get finished, if you'll back up 30, 40, 50 yards and look at your blind when you get done, and if there's anything that stands out that you don't think is natural that looks right, then it's for sure going to stand out to the deer.
Yeah.
So then you just address it with whatever color of brush or whatever you feel like it needs. And I've even taken a rake and raked up leaves and just thrown them up after I brush, especially if I got a lot of cedars mixed in, and just let those leaves kind of fall in where they do. And it gives it an awesome 3D effect also. And so, yeah, I think it's, especially when you're trying to set up in a spot that you're going to hunt really quick and you don't have time. Now, you can go set a ground blind out somewhere in July and let them get used to it, and it won't be a big deal. But if a lot of times when you're trying to figure out your setup, you might not know exactly where you're going to set up until it's time to start hunting.
Correct.
And so I think that's where you have to really go to a lot of pains to set it up right.
No, for sure. I think a couple things that I've noticed myself in all the things you've just said is being mindful where the sun is going to rise and then where it's going to set, in the sense of if you're going to have that sun in your face, and that's just be mindful, because sometimes we got camera equipment and different stuff, you know, because sometimes that camera's got to be a little further up front from a light standpoint. And so that overhang is important. So adjusting that. And then the other thing, Spook, and I've done this multiple times, is when you're drawing your bow, is making sure, because if you've brushed your blind and it's been there and the leaves have died, it can get noisy if you bump it. So making sure that when you draw, you're not hitting the back of the blind and making a noise, and little things like that I've made mistakes on.
So as far as that kind of stuff goes, I mean, what I'll do once I get it all done, I'll get in with a pair of tweezers or just, you know, little
Clippers.
Yep. And I'll get in and I don't never like to cut out a hole. I'll just cut out slivers, you know, little places where I can, you know, because I want it to be as covered as possible. Pick little spots like 3 or 4 inches wide. You know, it might just be a sliver here and a sliver here, and there still might be stuff hanging down, but I'm just cutting out little shooting holes.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so you can kind of pick your spots, and then you say, okay, I think there's a good chance the deer is going to be right there in that area. Okay, well then try to make that one of your, and you're doing a whole nother part of, you know, 15 to 30 minutes of just in there placing everything. And a lot of times I'll take, so, a lot of the ground blinds have a dividers that come down, or I'll take zip ties and maybe cut a little cedar limb or a little oak limb or something
Yep.
and zip tie it to that. And then there might be one little limb or leaf sticking out in my hole. I'll just reach up there and snip that out. Got me a
Yep.
little spot to shoot. And so that you're still basically fully camoed, but yet you've got your shooting hose. And then when you've got the stuff hanging out over you, then you've created your shadow. And if I never like to set up where the sun is setting in the face, but it has to, with a west wind and the sun setting in the west, a lot of times that's the way it works out,
Yep.
and so you end up with that problem. But most of the time the sun gets behind the trees early enough, and then with the overhang and the camo, like we was
That
talking about.
helps.
And if you get in there and you test it out and you see that there's a problem, then you just figure out a way to cover it up. Just to
Well,
put more brush in there and block the sun.
Well, the other thing too, and we've done it if in that scenario is, when we're turkey hunting, you got blind to put over our cameras and stuff, the mesh kind of overhang or piece of material and all
Yeah,
of that,
yeah,
you can do that in there as well. But no, those are some really good tips. And I think taking the time, like you said, to step out and look, and I've been guilty of this, you set the blind up and you go. But go have somebody sit in it, somebody walk out there and
yeah.
look at it as if you were a deer, and that extra time and attention to detail obviously can sometimes make a huge difference.
For sure, for sure. And a lot of times, I like to. I'm always just I did that when I set up that place this past week. When I was setting it up, I was like, where would I put a ground blind, or where would I put a lock on? Where can I get? Where's the best place? And we actually figured out that the best way to get in and out. So it's one of these fields is a big plum thicket, just
Okay.
30 acre fields, just nothing but a big plum thicket. And so one of the things that we decided is that the best way to come in and out to just make the least amount of disturbance was to cut a trail and put a ground blind just in one of those clumps of plum trees, and not even get to where you have to even walk close to the tree line or the crops or the buck muffin or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that to get into it. Because as I said over and over and over, getting in and out if you can fix a place that you can get in and out of without spooking the deer 98% of the time, that's a big part of the battle.
Yep.
Because if you can do that, and then this particular spot, the sun, we were basically set up great for anything west, northwest, southwest. And then in the evening, the sun's going to be setting on the opposite side of the tree line. So it's deer will come in to a shady spot to feed in the evenings way earlier than they will a sunny spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're set up to where, in the afternoon, the sun's going to be off of this area probably 2 hours before dark.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to make a difference. The
That's a
wind.
great point. That seems so simple, but it's so logical as far as a buck's going to go into a shaded area before he just pops out into the hot
Exactly. And
sun.
they're going to eat. If you ever notice, if they're in a bean field, if it's hot, it's summer or late summer or early fall, and it's hot outside, they're going to come out and they're going, if there's shade, whatever part of the field is shaded is normally where they'll come feed the first 15 to 30 minutes of the afternoon. If the sun's beaming right in on the place that they want to feed, they're going to come in later a
Yep.
lot of the times. And so, just taking all those things in consideration, I think we figured this spot out really quick. I just hope he shows up. I hope the buck hadn't been seen this year. We're gambling on the fact that the guy said he's sure he made it through season. He's sure nobody killed him because he saw him late in the season. So we're just hoping that something else didn't happen, get run over or who knows what, but what happens to him sometimes. He said he's seen him there for a couple of years. So I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited too because I might actually be filming this buck with you.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. Exactly. So
yep,
yeah, I'm pretty pumped about it.
cool. All right, next question: real rattling horns or fake horns? Which ones sound better? Does putting grip tape on the real rattling horns affect the sound? And then I'll go back and do you think deer can tell the difference between real and fake horns?
Man, so I don't think there's anything like the real thing.
Okay.
So I mean, I have used a particular product that a guy developed many years ago, and he did a phenomenal job with it. And I loved it. And it hooked on your belt and around your thigh, and you could rattle with it with one hand. And you didn't have to worry about hanging horns up or picking them up while the deer's looking or the deer seeing you rattle. You could turn your body, you could hold your bow in one hand and rattle with the other. And he had done an 8-year study and did a lot of documentation and research and recording bucks fighting to get as close to, I mean, did decimal test, everything else. And this thing sounded awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to help him do something with the product. And he ended up selling the rights to it for a while to another company. And I'm not going to tell what it was called or anything else because I'm still hoping someday I may be able to do something with it. And they changed the name, they changed the color, they changed the size of it. So, and I think his non-compete has run out. So I would love to put something back together with that product. Now I think it sounded awesome. I've
Okay.
never heard anything else that sounded as good as what that was, except for real antlers, which is what I use most of the time. I actually I had two sets of that product. I had two different ones, and I think one of them burned up in a fire that we had, a warehouse fire we had last year, and I had left. I think I gave the other one away to somebody because they liked it so much. So I'm disappointed I don't have it anymore. So right now I use real antlers, and I don't think there's anything wrong with putting some tape on it, grip tape or whatever. I've never done that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think the biggest thing that I've seen when I'm rattling is seems like the more aggressive I get, the louder I get, the harder I bang them together, and the more noise I make, the better luck I have. I've
Okay.
had always start out light because you figure if there's a deer close, he might,
Mm-hmm.
you might not need to
Yep.
really get aggressive. But the best I've done, the most success I've had rattling is just being super loud and aggressive.
So what? Okay. So what is the trigger for you on when to start rattling in the season? All right. So is there a sign you're looking for in the woods? Is it just a time of year that historically you've had success based on the states you've hunted?
So I really think that there's not necessarily a bad time to rattle because how many times do you see bucks in the not in the summer, but after they've shed their velvet, maybe in September, uh, especially early October, just sparring, just playing. They're
Mm-hmm.
not serious. It's not like a rut fight or anything like that. It's just. So
Yeah.
I think you can be successful rattling in different ways almost all the season. Now I don't do it that much except during the pre-rut and post-rut because most of the time I'm hunting a food source. And so I'm expecting a deer on its natural pattern coming to a food source. The more I hunt, if I'm hunting in the woods more, I would tend, or in a funnel, or in more what I would call almost a rut type situation, I would want to rattle more But I know some people that's had really good success just tickling horns, not just lightly in early season.
Okay.
Yep. But I mean, obviously, the last few days of October into the middle of first 8 or 10 days of November, and then around Thanksgiving into the first week of December. One of the best rattling days I ever had was in Kansas in the first week of December, back when I was rifle hunting before I started bow hunting Kansas really hard. I rattled in 13 bucks in one morning and killed a 168 8-pointer, and it was a phenomenal morning of hunting. I mean, one of the
I mean,
best
I guess
mornings of
so.
hunting. It was, I mean, it was epic. I
Yeah.
mean, epic morning. I mean, you rattle in, I felt like I was in South Texas. I
Yeah.
mean, it was awesome. And it's so much fun. It's like turkey hunting. When you call a turkey and he gobbles and he puts on a show and he comes into you, that's awesome. Well, okay. And when you bugle or rattle or rake for an elk or a moose or
Hmm.
whatever, that correspondence you have with that animal makes it awesome. When you grunt and snort, wheeze, and rattle a deer in, it's fun.
Oh,
So
look, man, one of my favorite. This is going way back. So I know you, Larry Weissoon.
yeah.
I mean, he in Texas was like one of the masters of just going and setting up and
Yeah.
rattling and back in the day. And I always enjoyed watching him rattle like he did in Texas and
Yeah,
having
and that's where
success.
it really got. South Texas is where rattling really just got on another level years and years, like you said, back in the day. And then when a lot of people are like, oh, it won't work anywhere else. It won't work anywhere else. I've had it work a lot of places. I've rattled in a
Hmm.
lot of deer through the years. Now, granted, I have had more success in Kansas and Oklahoma than I have a lot of other places, but I've still had success in other places. One of the coolest things I ever did was down in Sonora, Mexico, rattling in mule deer, and
Oh,
those
wow.
those guys thought I'd lost my mind, and so we're high racking on trucks in the desert, and which is it's kind of tough hunting because it's you gotta be able to have good eyes. You got to be able to identify, is that a shooter? Is that a buck you're willing to shoot? You got to be able to figure out a placement on the shot in that brush down there. And I mean, it's fun, but it's challenging.
Hmm.
So one day we're just sitting there and we're just quiet, and there was two old ratty mule deer horns that were chalk white laying in the bed of the truck, and I just picked them up, hit them together for about 30 seconds, and that was about a 180 mule deer running there with his hair on fire. And everybody just froze, which that wasn't quite what I was looking for, but I was
It worked.
it was fun. So that
Yeah.
night I got me a better set of horns that was there in camp. And I told the head guy, I said, tell the driver the guy that was in the truck with us, I said, tell him that we're going to drive. We'll ease up about every 400 or 500 yards. I want to cut the truck off, leave it off for about 10 to 15 minutes, and nobody talks or says anything except maybe just low or whispering or something. And I said, then I'm going to rattle for 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll wait 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll move to another spot. I think that next morning I rattled in 15 bucks, including a 30-inch 190 class deer that I didn't shoot, and made the guide mad. He got so mad I didn't shoot. I was looking for a 200, and
Yep.
he was a beautiful deer, but it just wasn't quite what I was looking for. And I said one thing about it, they thought I was crazy. They told the head guy, they're like, oh, he thinks just because it worked one time. I don't even know how many bucks I rattled in that day, but it was a blast. And
Love
so
it.
the next thing I knew, everybody had rattling horns in the back of their truck.
Of course they did.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, that's good. Okay, so on the topic of rattling, and I know you've done this some, is decoying. So if you're hunting the woods, it's one thing to rattle, but let's talk about when are you decoying, and are you rattling when you've got a decoy in front of you? Because obviously the buck can see that there's another buck there.
Yeah, so I mean, when you have a decoy, is a great time to rattle because there's something visual there for the buck to lock in on. And normally, if he responds to the rattling and he sees the decoy, he's going to come in. So that's all awesome. I mean, I've always had best success with decoys in bigger open areas, uh,
Mm-hmm.
places where you're hunting, where there's maybe big crop fields or CRP or like Kansas, Oklahoma, different places like that. But also in farm country where you've got these big farm fields.
Yep.
You may have a cornfield that's got 200 acres in it, or a big pasture that deer are crossing in the rut or whatever, and you're trying to decide where to put a stand. Well, you just try to get in a place where you can set that decoy out where they can see it if they come across anywhere, and then you rattle and grunt, snort, wheeze, and try to get their attention. And when they see that decoy, it's so much fun. Decoying is a blast because it's like a turkey. When he sees a decoy that he gets mad at, I mean, they put on a show. And the same way with the deer. And seeing them walk up and posture and turn sideways and lay their ears back, and the hair stands up all over their body, and their
Mm-hmm.
eyes roll back in their head, and they're fixing to tear your decoy up. So yeah, I love it. It generally works the best in the last few days of October, first week of November, and then maybe some at the end of November.
Okay.
Again, there's usually a tighter window. It seems like during the rut, they're usually so tuned in, running so hard with the doe and finding does easy enough. They seem to be less likely to be combative in the rut, but it's still not a bad plan if you're in a
Mm-hmm.
place where you're especially when you're bow hunting and you're trying to get a deer in close for a shot,
Correct.
and you don't really have anything else to get him in there. That's a great
Yep.
tool. Yeah.
So so two things. One is, how do you set the decoy up? Body positioning to where you're at, ground blind, tree
Mhm.
stand. Obviously, you're playing the wind. But number two is, what decoys do you use? What have you had the best success? And I know some people can go to extremes. Not everybody may have that opportunity to do that. But let's talk about positioning of the decoy,
So
and then
normally
secondarily,
the
which one?
buck's going to circle around and try to hit the other buck head on. So if you put the decoy where it's facing away from you and he comes in straight, then that's usually not going to be your best angle for a shot. So try to look at it like, here's my tree stand or my ground blind, and I'd like for him to come around to the right side. So I'm going to turn my decoy. Most of the time you'll have it quartered one way or
Okay.
the other, almost
Yep.
towards you.
Yep.
But you can quarter it. Where he's and make him come around is really. But you just know that he's probably going to circle it to come in head first, and then my experience has been they almost always are going to circle it and come face it head on. I like to
Okay.
put mine at an angle and where it puts him either quartering to me or quartering away. And then, if he's quartering to me, I like that shot right in
Mm-hmm.
that area at that angle. And then of course, if he's quartering away behind the shoulder, but and then the decoys. So I used to have a decoy made by a company, and I'm so mad at myself that I went blank on their name because they've always been very supportive of me. Uh,
I mean, look, some of the more detailed ones are a Dave Smith, and then you've
yeah,
got
see,
some
so
that
these guys
are,
do mounted. It's a mounted deer.
it's a mounted, yeah. And then I was
Yeah,
going to say some are actually mounted
yeah. This is a
decoys.
mounted deer with rebar in the legs, and you stick it up in
Yeah.
the ground, and it was awesome. you know, and it actually had an electronic head and tail. Now, that's not legal in some states, so you'd have to take the battery out. It had a remote control. If it's not legal where you're at, they actually make decoys for game and fish and
Okay.
to use as Timex on the road. And so but if you take the battery out and it's incapacitated, then it's okay. And so that was a really good decoy. And then is it DSD or?
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah, yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I had a good luck out of that decoy. It burned in that fire last July. I'm sick
I think
about it.
that's the Dave Smith.
Yeah. So I bought one in North Dakota in big sporting goods store up there years ago, and it was awesome. I really liked it because I could carry it pretty easy. I had a big custom made one made about 25 years ago that was unbelievable. I mean, it was custom made out of like plaster of Paris,
Mm.
and it was amazing. But it was a little hard to carry. It was a little, but it looked incredible. And he had pegs and real antlers that went on it, and so it was. And then another really cool thing that I invented myself that I don't even know if you know about. That's amazing. I had a guy. It took me about 3 tries to get the guy to, and I lost it in the fire also. So I came up with a shield that you run your arm through like the warriors did back in the day,
Okay.
and the front of it's mounted, so you had basically, and you shave down the form so that you make it as thin as you can to make it as light as you can, and then it had a metal rod that came where the front legs would be, so that if you needed to stake it down to take a shot, you could. And then so the head and the front shoulder and just part of the side of it was a mounted deer skin face, and then I took horns off of just a bow target, just off of one of the McKenzie bow targets, or I don't remember which company it
Mhm.
was. I think it was McKenzie, and fixed it the same type where you just set the horns down in it just like you would on the bow target. And I had it where I could stalk with that and be behind it. And then when you got to it, you could just stake it down and pull your arm out. And of course, you'd have your bow in your other hand, and then you could get ready and draw as the deer was coming in. I
Love it.
mean, that thing was awesome. So yeah, it was sick. And that guy said, "This is the coolest thing." And I mean, I was actually wanting to go to market with it, and really take it to another level because it and I've seen a couple of people do something similar on social media. Just make up these guys who just
Yeah.
made something on their own, but it'll work in the right situation. It's just another, like I said, it's another
It's
tool.
another tool.
You see a
Yep.
deer out in the CRP or in a field or something, and it's especially if you've got some grass, like some knee high or waist high grass, so that it helps kind of. Oh, it works phenomenal in places like that.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's switch to some camera setup,
Mhm.
and let's talk about where would you set up cameras through the summer to get inventory on your deer herd in states where you cannot bait.
So I know the guy that asked this question, and he's hunting Illinois, and Illinois is a very challenging place to get pictures for that reason. You can't feed anytime. And so that makes it very difficult because I don't think they even allow you to put out mineral or salt rocks or mineral blocks or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the time you're trying to figure out, like on a soybean field or a clover field or a alfalfa field, places to set up cameras. Usually you need to set up almost like 3 times more cameras to get a decent, to get a picture of a
Yeah.
buck. Now it obviously becomes easier when you start getting close to the rut, and like say in late October, you set up places on scrapes or where your scrapes have been or where you anticipate. And then you can try to set it up on trails. If you see a trail coming in the bean field or in a alfalfa field, you just find trails and set it up. If you find pinch points, funnels, anything that you think that you've seen deer before or think that they're traveling or anything that they're coming into, usually I have to set up 3, like I said, 3-to-1 cameras in Illinois
Mm-hmm.
versus other places. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Last question, my man. And this is about mock scrapes. So, mock scrape best practices, best locations. what to look for, how do you prep for them, height, surroundings, and all of that. And I'll throw in there, like, when do you start doing that?
So I've actually started them as soon as mid-October. Now, how much difference did it make? I don't know, but it seemed like the closer the rut came, the more activity I would have there if I established some. A lot of times I establish mock scrapes in late October on in almost all of November in places where there's either already a scrape or where I'm hunting, or
Mm-hmm.
there's if there could be a low hanging limb over there that's got a big scrape in it, and I got a stand that's 30 yards from it, and there's another overhanging limb somewhere in between it. I'll do another one right there close to where I'm hunting, and now I have also cut limbs and made my own overhanging if there's a place where I wanted one to be and there
Yep.
wasn't one there, then I would just create one. And like even I mean, I know guys and I've done it where you just put a post up out in the food plot and put a just like I was talking about cutting a little tree
Yep.
for the blind. You just cut a little tree and wire it to the post and create one right there in your plot. And it's almost like I mean, it can be like that can be real effective because it's almost like they just like zone
The
in
magnet.
on that one. It's like a magnet for that one.
Yep.
I had a guy that have you seen the scrape ropes that
Mm-mm.
so they got now there's a concept. It's pretty cool. The guy sent me 3 ropes last week where you hang a rope down and these bucks, you put your buck urine or your estrus urine or whatever on that rope, and these deer just they like to rake it's the weight of that rope hanging down. There's something about that rope that they like to you know uh, rub their
Yeah.
orbital glands and all that on, and so I'm excited to try that. I've never done it, but I've seen other people that's been doing it. And I want to do it to have fun with it
Yeah.
and use it for getting pictures.
Well,
But
I'll get the name of it from you, and we'll
yeah,
post it
yeah,
in
I'll
the
get it.
description.
I'm ashamed of myself. I can't remember it, but the guy's really nice to me. He reached out to me on social media, and I apologize anytime there's somebody whose name I can't remember. I can remember what the weather was and what day I shot a deer 20 years ago, and I can't remember somebody's name from one day to the next. But it makes me so mad. But I'm excited about using that in a few places. But I've done a ton of mock scrapes. I like to get fresh doe urine or buck urine. Right now, I'm using flawless urine. Danny has been really good. She's got a really good supplier. And, my thing has always been I just don't like stuff that's set on the shelf for a long time. And I don't trust things that are come out of Walmart and different places like that because what do they do with the stuff they take off the shelf or they don't sell for the year before? You think they throw it away?
Mm-hmm.
No, they don't. They stick it back there and they stick it back on the shelf the next year. And you don't know. And urine is not supposed to be black or brown.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a clearish, maybe a little yellowish, clearish color. And if it's not, then it's
Yeah.
old. It's
Yeah.
already and it's basically already turned into ammonia. And so uh, I get fresh urine. I used to get it from Real Scent Amish up in Pennsylvania, and I actually had my own product one time. It was called Spook Spann's Wildfire. You may remember it. And
I do.
the guy asked me, he said, if we could make a product that would be something that you would get behind 100%, he said, what would it be? I said, a doe and estrus urine that I could order and it be on my doorstep in 2 to 4 days.
Yep.
I said or you could put it in a store fresh and they'll keep it in a cooler or something. Or even if
Mm-hmm.
it just make sure it doesn't get hot. Even if it's in the store room temperature is okay.
Yeah.
for a while.
It's getting the transportation, keeping
Yeah,
it cool.
just make sure. I said that would be something that I could get behind, and we did it, and it was really just gaining momentum right when they kind of had a restructuring um, uh, of the kind of a changing of the guard from the older ones to the younger ones, and I'm pretty sure that that's where Danny. I think that's where she gets hers at.
Okay.
And so she has access to fresh doe urine, and she'll usually wrap it up in a cold pack in a foil type and ship it next day to me, and I'll put it right in the refrigerator, and that's what I use in the season. And I use buck urine, doe urine, and then doe and estrus urine, and
Okay.
I use it. I do a lot of mock scrapes. Have I ever had a big buck or a big buck that I didn't know I had, or shot a big deer in it? I don't think I ever have, but what I have had happen is it seems like it creates more activity in the area
Well,
where I'm at. And I'll come back after a day or two after making one, and there'll be 3 fresh scrapes and tore all to pieces, where it's like it pissed him off or something.
yep.
And so I've seen that happen a lot. So there again, I'm always just trying to create a new community center for the deer.
You said it, brother, and that was the word I was going to use that you've talked about many times. Is creating a community. It's
Yep.
with the antler grow, spraying it everywhere. It's the variety of mock scrapes. It's not putting your food where you can legally, bait, and it is
Right.
not in a pile. You're spreading it everywhere
Yeah.
and in a big space, and it's the community, and that's one of the things I know in the future I need to do a little better job of that as
Yeah.
well.
I want it to be a Sunday afternoon hoedown
Barbecue,
every
baby.
day. And that's what you're trying to do, is just create activity,
Yep.
activity, activity. And if he just commits himself to visiting it 1 or 2 more times a week, anything that you can do to get him to
Yep.
come by there and check it out, or get a bite to eat, or do a scrape or whatever, just 1 or 2 or 3 times more a week, it's gonna
Yep.
help.
Absolutely. And you're going to get another picture that maybe you didn't have, and be able to get that intel
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
dial it in and know when to be there. So,
And here's what'll happen. I mean, those younger bucks and does, they just get to where they hang around that stuff more. They'll stand around there longer the more stuff you have there, like we're talking about.
yep.
And it's like I've said this, you remember with whiplash, I just did a mock scrape that morning. I cut an evergreen limb. It was off of a wild holly tree. And I took a screw in step and put it in the tree, and took zip ties and zip tied that holly limb to it, and used estrus fallis doe urine underneath, just tore it all up. That I climbed the tree in the dark, hung my bow up, pulled my bow up, hung it up, getting my release arm guard ready, getting my ozonics set up. JD's up there. He's already climbed up ahead of me, and he's already setting up while I'm building the mock scrape. I reach I get my bow, hang it on the hanger, and I'm just, getting everything. And I hear something and look, and I can't see it yet because it's still dark. I put my binoculars up, and there's a buck in the scrape just getting after it. And I just made it. It was a 2.5-year-old 8-pointer. And I just laughed. I was like, that's
Yeah.
awesome. And I
Yeah. It's
probably had
absolutely.
that day, I probably had 3 or 4 bucks in that scrape that day.
What time of year was that, Spook?
That was in November.
Okay.
And so I don't remember exactly if it was the next day or 2 days later or whatever. We're in the stand. We had seen Whiplash come by that morning, chased a doe off. So that evening, that doe comes in and she's eating, and there's a little buck on that mock scrape, just a little 6-pointer, just getting after it. Well, Whiplash he's standing back there, if you remember, standing back
Yep.
there in the honeysuckle briars, won't come in, just standing there watching her, just stone cold. But every now and then he'd look over at that little buck, which in my opinion even gave him more, relaxed him even more, because he didn't see him as a threat. And the buck wasn't even walking over to her. And I don't know whether he sensed his presence or whether he just knew he didn't have a shot. I don't know. He didn't even pay any attention to her. The little buck didn't. But then, if you remember, I heard a buck coming through the woods
that you didn't even know what it was.
I didn't know what it was. I never turned my head because I was afraid he'd see me, because he was just looking straight at her, and she was right there in front of me about 13, 14 yards. And when that deer, I heard that deer getting closer, and I heard him get up beside me, and he stopped. And all of a sudden, that's when Whiplash's demeanor just changed. And I know that buck was looking at the buck. He was looking at the doe. He was standing there, probably wasn't over 5 or 6, 7 yards from the doe. And that's when the hair stood up on his body and his eyes rolled back. And when those ears laid back, I was like, this is it. We're going to kill him right now. And I just think there again, I created a community center.
Yep.
And the more deer that come to that spot, the better chance there was that he would make an appearance, and that something would happen to get him in there close enough for a shot. And that's how it went down. But I just think with all these things that we talk about, they're all things that I think will improve your opportunity, or your odds. If it just raises your odds 5%, that's 5% more than it was the day before,
100%, buddy.
And I think if you do all these things, from the camo and the blind, making sure it's scent free, using ozonics, clean clothes, making sure your chair is set in a place where you don't have to move. A lot of times I like to hunt out of those tripod chairs, and I can drop down to one knee real easy and shoot super easy that way. I feel like I'm a little bit more, some reason when I drop my leg down and put one knee on the ground and I draw, I just feel steadier than I do when I'm just sitting on my butt in that chair.
Yep.
I don't know, something about anchoring your knee to the ground, to me, just steadies me up. And so I make sure my ozonics is not going to get in the way of my bow limb. Make sure your cameraman's not in your way. The camera's not in your way, and you're not in his way. All these things that you make sure when you're up in a tree that your bow hanger and your bow's hanging right, like where if you're right-handed and you're going to hold the bow with your left hand, where you just have barely a little bit of movement to take your bow off the limb. You don't want to be having to reach back and get up or do whatever to get your bow. I mean, just all those little things, the mock scrapes, the fresh urine, the antler grow, all these different things, I think, are the things that add up to make you more successful more often.
That's it, man. And that's what we're trying to do with this, is just pick your brain and share your years of experience and success and, failures and all of that stuff to just help people be more successful in the woods. No matter if you're hunting a 200 inch or you're hunting your 140 inch mature buck on your property, it's all things to help everybody.
I mean, to me, I've always said this: a 5, 6, 7-year-old deer, he doesn't know whether he's a 140 or a 240.
Yep, but he knows he's smart.
Brain. And so it's all relevant to those older deer. I tell you something else I thought of we need to do.
All right.
Did you see that deer that I posted this past week, of the blind deer that I hunted years ago?
Yes.
So I've gotten a big response out of that. Last time I checked, it was close to 400,000 views. And
wow.
I think one of the things we ought to talk about too, and I could probably show pictures of most of them, are the bucks that I hunted really hard that I didn't get, and why I think it didn't work out.
I'd love that.
I think that's something I don't really hear anybody
Yeah.
doing. I think that'd be fun. It's
No,
painful. It's going to be
of
way more
course it is, but
painful and a lot less enjoyable for me. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in it.
yeah, I think that's a must do, brother. And
Yeah,
we will absolutely pick some of those and we'll show pictures
yeah.
and do that. I think that's the whole premise of what we're doing here.
I'd actually kind of forgot about that buck. He was in Ohio and he was blind in one eye, and I'll never forget it. I'd heard the Eskers had told me stories about this buck. They's like, but man, he just disappears. We don't know where he goes, blah, blah, blah. So they're showing me some different spots, and we see this one spot, and the guy's he's like, man, he might lease it. So we went and talked to him. Well, the guy was just really rude, and they knew him, but he's really rude. So it's like, oh, well, okay, that's not going to work. Well, about an hour, he calls my buddy, he calls Scott, and he says, man, I'm sorry. I was having a bad day. It was bad timing. I apologize. Y'all come back by here.
Okay.
So I ended up leasing
Yep.
it from him. So it was a soybean field there beside his house, and I fixed up a spot and put a camera on it. First time we checked it, I bet we had 50 pictures of that buck.
Oh, wow.
And they lose their mind. They're going, oh my gosh, we've been looking for that buck for 3 years, and they were just going crazy. And I really, really thought I got a ton of pictures of that buck. And that particular picture, a lot of people think's fake, and it's not. That is the picture. But it was the sun in the mornings would just be, and he wouldn't come in very often in the mornings, but occasionally he would. And that morning, the sun was shining on him right after it just come up, and he was just, it just lit him up, and it was just
Love it.
a beautiful sunrise picture shining on him, and it just lit him up. And he had a kind of reddish velvet, and it was just a beautiful picture. And I had forgotten that I had it, and I ran across it. I was like, oh, okay, let's post this one. This is one got away. I hunted that deer all the way up. ATA was in Columbus that year.
Okay.
And I don't know if you were there or not, but that year there was a big ice snowstorm.
Oh, yeah.
And I left the show early and went and got in a redneck blind. Me and Scott did. I saw every single deer, every single buck I had on camera in that spot
Except him.
that year came by except him. And I told, including one deer that was probably 9.5 years old.
Wow.
I mean, just an old, I should have shot him. I was just so sure, I was still so sure I was going to kill this deer that I just.
Yeah. No, he was a beautiful deer. Big mainframe, had trash. Yeah.
We found out in May. So that was in, what was that? That was in January.
Yep.
I hunted him a couple more times in January. Never got another picture of him after sometime in late October. We found out in May from the taxidermist he got killed on November 13th, about a mile away. So I'd been hunting a dead deer since November 13th. I put a whole season in, nobody ever, I don't like it. Nobody ever.
Well, social media wasn't what it.
Stories.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I hunted that deer for 2.5 months and he was dead.
He was,
yeah.
Well, look, I don't think too many people are going to feel too sorry for you.
No, I know.
With all, I'm kidding. I'm teasing you, brother. I'm teasing you.
Giving me a hard way to go, because I was.
I'm teasing you, man.
Yeah.
No, that's tough. There's no question. So, well, brother, thank you so much. Another great episode of just some good Q&A, some good tips. And as always, thank you. And thank you everybody for listening and supporting us. It just continues to get better and better. And we feel very blessed to be able to do this. So
hey, I'm
safe travels.
Love it.
Absolutely. All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Next time.